It's great to be back presenting at JavaOne again. That's awesome. Been looking forward to this for a while. This is not going to be a technical talk. If you saw in the agenda, this is it said beginner because we don't expect you to know any code. We're going to talk more about incentives and what's the value that you get out of using Java as an enterprise, not just as a developer. A little bit about myself. My name is Aurelio Garcia-Ribeyro. I'm a senior director of product management with the Java Platform Group. Like many people here, I came to the Java team in Oracle through the Sun acquisition. I was with the Java team with Sun for a couple of years before that. And part of what I do is go and talk to people about what has been added to the platform. I warn people about the changes that might impact them way into the future when they adopt a new release. And I get to talk about this internally and externally as well. Today I wanted to cover a little bit about, we all know the value of Java for developers. What's the value of Java for an enterprise? Why do enterprises choose Java? Now, when we were talking about changing the release model, and we were going to figure out how often we were going to have a new release of Java, we did the typical PM thing. We went around and we asked a bunch of people if we were to change the release model. We were releasing a major version every 3 to 5 years. What would be a reasonable amount of time between releases? And you would expect when you ask this question to a bunch of people to get some sort of normal distribution that shows somewhere around the middle. Some people want more, some people want less, but there's a clear middle, right? Of course, when we did this, we didn't get a clear middle. I don't know if anybody thought about this. We got two very distinct distributions, two very different set of people. We had some users who told us, we just want rapid innovation. If there's a new feature available, I don't want to wait for it. I don't have a problem with having a release every 3 months, every 6 months, every 2 weeks. If you have once a feature is ready, give it to me, right? Those were the developers. Developers under the old model sometimes had to wait years because even though their feature was ready, the release driver wasn't ready, and that drove them insane, right? Why am I waiting for a functionality that's been available in the code base for a long time? Don't make me wait. Just give it to me. I'll take care of it. If there's a bug, I'll code around it. The problem, of course, is we cannot really move quickly and give you things rapidly if we are not allowed to change things in the back. We cannot carry everything forever. Up until Java 8, we hadn't removed anything that had been deprecated. We hadn't closed internal APIs, even though we told people not to use it. So part of the expectation was, yes, change everything quickly, but never change anything that already existed before. And that's not possible, right? So even though they say keep things coming quickly, it was under the condition that, but don't, everything has to be simple, portable, secure. With the introduction of the new rapid cadence, we did start to remove things and change things. Here's a collection. Now, there's a very high bar for getting removed from the JDK. And it's not, we thought of a smarter way of doing things, or we don't like that feature, or that feature is not widely used. The bar is, it has to be something that's holding back the platform from moving forward. So everything that you see here was in some way stopping the platform from moving as quickly as we wanted it to. Now, if you look at this, you'll find the deprecated the applet API, which given that the browsers no longer support applets, nobody really objects to that, right? We have others, the removal of the Java EE and Corba modules, which were not actually part of the SEA specification, but shipped with it. None of the ones here was widely used. But when you have 9 to 10 million developers, even when you take something that is used by a very small percentage, that could be hundreds or thousands of applications that could be impacted every time you do a change. So of course, there's a lot of change there. Then back to my little question, we had a different set of users that didn't care at all about new features. Who were they? Those were the users that already had an application running, They had no intention of taking advantage of any new functionality. They just want that application to keep running as it was running before until the heat death of the universe. They don't want to change anything ever, right? But of course, they do, right? When they say, I don't want to change anything, they don't actually mean that. There's certain things that you must change. If somebody finds a security vulnerability that could jeopardize my application, yes, fix that, change it, of course. And if there's a critical bug fix, yeah, we need to backport that and fix that. There's also some external data that you have to keep in mind, right? We have time zone data that gets updated several times a year. If my application runs in one of those locales, it better know what the right time zone data is. And there's the most important one, from my point of view, is keep up with new cryptography. It used to be that I could encrypt with a 64-bit key and everything was fine. Now that same algorithm requires 128. So I'm going to have to double the cryptography, but I don't want my application to take much longer to encrypt. So yes, some performance improvement in cryptography so it can work as it was before, but with higher encryption. Also need to disable the older ones. And you started coding, you developed this application in Windows 95. At some point, it's no longer supported. You need to move to a different version of Windows. You want to carry your application, even though sometimes the operating system brought in some changes, right? Anybody here coding something against Oracle Linux 9? If it has a UI and you want to run it in Oracle Linux 10, you'll discover that X11 is no longer available. It has to go to Wayland. You want your application to continue working, even though it's using a complete different graphic engine. So what do we do then when we have these two very distinct use cases, both of them very valid? Well, it's simple. Do both, right? You don't have one thing, you have two. So for those, now we don't have conflicting priorities, we have two distinct priorities and two distinct products. So the first priority is rapid innovation, but the first priority is also stability. And that means we have, you've probably heard of this, the tip and the tails, not tail, we have multiple tails. And then we treat them as different products, okay? Now, if you've been to other talks, you've probably seen a reference to the JEP 14 tip and tail written by my colleague, Alex. And if you read it, it focuses mostly on maintainers of third-party libraries and what the benefit for them would be to adopt a similar model to the JDK. But there's a lot of information here that would apply also for an enterprise developer. And we'll explain some of the decisions that we've made and what we offer for those developers. So let's visualize a little bit the tip and tail. You've seen these slides before. These are the release cadence. These are the models. We actually changed the license. For a while, we make our JDK releases available under a very permissive license. After a while, we change them. Therefore, the color change over here. When we talk about the tip and tail, this is what we mean. The tip is the set of releases that just keeps coming every 6 months. The tail, not every release has a tail. Some releases have a tail. And it's that long time of support that's available for some of those releases, not all of them. Notice that the tip, all of it, is under the free use Java license. So those are the permissive releases. But also the first part of the tails are included there, okay? Now, if we have this model, then we have different things that are valuable for our different audiences. For the developers, what this breaking away and not having to care about the tail, what does it mean? First, I get a very rapid cadence of some incremental improvements. Every 6 months, we get a list of JEPs. This time it was particularly large, 24. In other cases, it's been as small as 5. You can suddenly see that some developers look at the list of JEPs that came on a release, and they're like, yeah, there's nothing there for me, right? But there's some small changes for everybody. Not quite as once every 6 months, but every now and then we see some much larger changes that impact a lot more developers. So there's some changes as large as those that were brought by the previous major releases, and it's still more frequently than every 3 years. Then we have a stable experience. Anybody here that knows how to code in JDK 8 knows how to code in JDK 11 and 17 or 20. You don't have to learn a new development language, a new paradigm. All of the expertise that you built on the prior releases continues to apply quite seamlessly, because part of the work is not just to put on a new feature and bolt it on the side, but to integrate it so that it seems as if it was always part of the platform. And that means that nobody here probably has used stream gatherers, right? But if you use stream collectors, then you will probably feel that gatherers are intuitive and you will know how to use them. So that means that every now and then you just have to apply a small varnish of knowledge to go from one release to the next. And we provide the varnish, right? We do have these high quality JEPs, which if you read, they'll have instructions on how to use these new features, the logic of why they were created the way they were, style guides, everything needed to go from one release to the next. And if you look at most conferences and what my DevRel colleagues do, they spend all of their time explaining those new features for new developers. We also have here's the good part for most developers. When I finish writing this application and it's put in production and I stabilize it and it runs, I can step away from the application and leave the idea of keeping it running for a long, long time to somebody else. And that's where most of this deck is, because it's for the people that are tasked with keeping that application that's running in production today running forever. Now, the fact that you're in the tail doesn't mean that you don't have to apply any changes, right? There are changes that you will have to take. Systems degrade over time. So when the developer says, I don't want you to change anything, what they really mean is, I want to keep the programs running today as if they had been written today, right? So I want the car to continue to be a car, but a modern one, right? It's very hard because it's unclear there's no common ground of what can be changed and what can't. Now, if you're a tail user, your pricing is stability, you still have to get quarterly updates to get all of the benefits that I'm going to describe. If not, your code is just stale. And finally, the tail extends the stable period for your application. It doesn't make it eternal. Eventually, JDK 8 will reach end of life. And even if you wanted to stay there forever, and at this moment it's December 2030, at that point, you have to go to somewhere else. But having the tails allow you to choose when to migrate. You're not forced to do it every 6 months. And you can also choose where to migrate to. If I'm leaving JDK 8, I have today the choice of 11, 17, 21, or 24. So what do I get for those that have an existing application? What's the value for the people that are not trying to rewrite something or maintain something that's running? Well, first, the program that was written and compiled a decade or two ago works today better than what it was written. What do I mean with that? Well, we figure out that most of the times when we were storing strings, we didn't need 2 bytes because most of the strings that we store are single byte. So we said, okay, we can do an optimization and store single byte when the string allows for it and double byte only when needed. Your application now uses less memory. It now handles emojis, even though you wrote it in the 90s where they didn't exist. You can just parse it normally and it won't have any hiccup. It uses TLS 1.3 today, even though it was written when SSL 1 or 2 was the way of communicating securely. And it runs, you coded it before AMD was a reasonable choice, but now you can just grab it and run it on an architecture that didn't exist. And all of that without you having to change a line of code. So what's the trick? Well, it's late binding, of course. What I mean with that, I write a C application. Okay, so I write it, I compile it, and I get a program in machine code with instructions to run on whatever I compile it in. If I compile it on a Linux system, I get a Linux program, and it's good to run on Linux. And if I want to support some other operating systems, if I chose the language correctly and there's a compiler for it, I can even get the same source code to compile. And now I have an application that runs on each one of those operating systems. Now, when I want to do this with a Java application, when I compile it, I don't get machine instructions. I get bytecode, which doesn't run anywhere. Bytecode doesn't run on any operating system. Before I can use bytecode, I need to get a runtime. And the Java runtime, somebody like Oracle will provide you with a Java runtime for Linux, a different runtime for Windows, another one for Mac. And as long as you have the right runtime, the same bytecode will work on all of them. Okay, so that's neat, but it seems like a lot more trouble, right? I added an additional component, an extra step. Why did we make things more complicated? Wasn't it simpler before? Well, one big benefit of this is how do you update this application? Right? Imagine that I'm running in 17.0.14. I could, of course, update the application if I want to change what it does, but if I just want to keep it current, when 17.0.15 comes along, I just update the runtime. And the application now works differently. I want to upgrade the application, and I'm making the distinction between update and upgrade because updating is just keeping it up. If I want to upgrade it, go further along, well, instead of running it in 17, I'm going to run it in 21. Right? And I've upgraded the application without having to recompile, redistribute, and change. How's that possible? Well, that's because the user experience of the application is a combination of the developer responsibilities. The developer decides what's the business logic, what does it do, how do I integrate to a database, what are the screens and the reports, or whatever I need to do. And the runtime provides the common libraries. No developer has to figure out how to sort a collection, right? We let the runtimes do it any way they want to. And we figure out the security. I don't have to figure out the encryption. I just let the libraries and the runtime provide the proper encryption. Likewise, the integration with the operating system, my memory management, all of that good stuff that needs to happen. Now, the stuff on my left, right, your business logic, the developer, it changes only if your application requirements change. The stuff on the right changes all the time. The industry makes it change all the time, and you have to update it. Now, there's one on the left that's not like the others. Anybody care to guess? Your third-party components, right? If you chose a third-party component, you may be overriding some functionality that otherwise would have been done by the library. When you choose a third-party component, there's nothing wrong with it, but choose wisely. Because now, in order to get the benefit, you have to be careful when you select it. You own all of the virtues and devices of the third-party components, and now you are responsible of keeping that up to date. So the number 2 reason why, when I speak with somebody, they cannot uptake a new version of Java is because they're using a tool or library that requires an older version, right? It's also one of the reasons why some people cannot stay on the tail for as long as they want. We will be providing JDK 8 until 2030. But if the library that your application requires is only supported until 2026, then you're not staying in JDK 8 until 2030. So beware when selecting your third-party libraries. Be as careful as you would when you were coding yourself, because now it is, for all intents and purposes, your code. Okay? Of course, every time you come up with a solution, you introduce a different problem, right? So there is a problem here. Now the runtime and the application are not tightly coupled. Now I need to figure out which runtime is being used for which application. So, little quiz here. If I find a Java runtime in that application, in that directory, pretty good chance that it's an HR application from my company, and there is some module that does the monthly consolidation script. It's easy to tell who's using it. Who's using that one? Probably all the applications in my company, right? But what if I have two of them? Who's running on 21 and who's running on 24? Or even better, that's the default location. Did somebody install it just to test it and it's no longer being used? Or is it being used to power some important applications? Now it's disconnected, right? It could be your startup script that decides which one you use, or an environmental variable, or your alternatives mechanism. And if you change it, you may change the runtime. So you now have to keep track of that. So it gets complicated. It also means, we've heard, that every application is translated into machine code every time it runs. Now, there's attacks in startup and warm-up, and improvements in the Java platform means that if your application lives for more than just a few seconds, you can probably just round that off. It's not really going to matter. But for some edge cases, that could be important. And we are working on, we have new technologies like RALVM that allow you to ahead of time compile it. And there's further improvements coming from Project Leiden that will try to minimize the impact of that. Now, I set requirement 1, but of course, being developers, there's always a 0 in front of a 1. There's an obvious point, which is, if I want to get the benefit of tip and tail, I must use the tip for development and the tails for these stable applications, right? What do we see very often? You have an enterprise, and they're saying, OK, we're coding in JDKX, whatever value of X it is. And a new version comes along, and somebody in the IT department looks at it and says, there's nothing in this release that we really care for, right? We're fine with where we are, so we're going to code the next set of applications. We're standardizing on JDK, fill in the blanks, 17, 11, 8, whatever. And then the next one comes along, and you keep coding on what is now no longer the most current version. And eventually, you realize that that version that you're using is reaching end of life. And now you have a massive debt, and you have to migrate them all within the next year. So all of your developers are now put in the migration effort. They will discover only now that there's some of the libraries that they rely on that haven't been updated in 3-4 years. But since they were using that all the time, they didn't know about it. So after all of this effort, you weren't able to migrate. You started too late. So you're going to call somebody like me and say, hey, could you extend the lifetime of JDK whatever for another year? Just 1 year. I only need 1 year, right? And I get that with every release like clockwork. And by the way, everybody that goes through this went from an old release to still an old release, but just not quite as old. Remember that I said that the reason why people don't update the second one was the third party? This is the first one. My company has standardized on the following version. Why? Right? It means that you're forcing your developers to use code. If you're coding today on JDK8, you're coding as it was in 2014. Even if you're in a 17, that's from 2021. You're not getting all of the advantages from the pinning solutions that we had with, there's no virtual threads there, right? There's a lot of stuff that's being left on the table. So what should I do? OK, you have some applications. New applications, code them with new runtimes. The old applications didn't have to be migrated, right? You just have different versions running depending on where is your application in its own lifetime. So on the same machine, I expect that you will have multiple runtimes. Now, the next one comes around. Eventually, not every application needs to live for decades. Some of the JDKX applications will just die of natural, they just no longer need to be updated. And the total amount of stuff that at some point you'll need to migrate gets reduced because the 8 years that we provided was sufficient. It can also happen that after a couple of years, you have some downtime in your new applications. You can ask your developers to migrate some of the older ones But there's no rush. I wasn't forced to do it the day it came out. I didn't hold up development of new applications. It's only, hey, we have some time, right? You'll eventually end up with as many runtime versions as long-term support releases. So I have a small blog, just 6 minutes, if you believe those automated how long it takes, that pretty much tries to give you the tools to tell your managers, please let me use new LTS, new releases for my new applications, and let's keep the old applications where they are, unless we're running out of time, right? If your application does need to live for 20 years, you will have to make a jump. Try to do it when you have a year or two to go, depending on how complex it is. Or, even though the application is fine, it's using a lot of CPU and memory. The cost of migrating an application that's constrained may well be worth it because you will get better performance in the newer runtimes. If that's not a problem, just spend your time developing new applications with new methodology. Of course, whenever, as before, whenever you come up with a nice solution, you have a new problem. This is the list of upcoming releases. This is a public page, java.com releases. My favorite view is view by month. And we have the date of the next set of releases for every version of Java that we support. On the top, we have up to 2 years worth of update releases. If you scroll a little bit, you have the complete history for all the way to JavaOne that tells you which releases were currently updated. So as I said, we produced a quarterly update with fixes. And as you can see, the long-term support releases, they just keep going up. Some of them, the ones that are not long-term support, like 22, they just go 2, and then they die, and then you're supposed to go to 23. Now, imagine that I have one of those applications running on JDK 8. This is where we are today. That's the latest version of 8. If you're using 8, use something lower. You're not applying the benefits of having the long-term support. You're just also waiting to get into trouble. That's an old version. So come April, we will produce all of those updates on top. Now, you can take the easy way out and just update. Just grab the next release and apply it. Or you have the choice. It's a little bit more convoluted. There is a chance that by trying to move to another release, that's what I call upgrade, you'll run into trouble. The further out you go, the more likely to have something removed, right? So if you're going to 11 and you were using the Corba EE modules, yeah, you're going to have to change your Maven builds and use that. If you go to 17, you may notice that some add exports no longer work. You need to, you keep adding. Now you go to 24. If you use the security manager, you'll have a problem. But overall, it's not super bad. However, what does that mean? Now I have to keep track of which Java version is up to date. If I go and I look at your machine today, and I find those versions, which ones are current? Okay? And everybody just, in your mind, which ones are current? Okay, the first one is not released. I don't know where you got that one from. That one is coming out in April, right? The second one is 8 months old. Only 17.014 and 8U441, which I used for my example, so I figure some of you might remember them, those are current. 11.020 is 20 months old. And I was just showing you the slide with all of those, and nobody knows that. I don't know that. Every time somebody asks me, I have to go to the page and find it. So, what can we offer to those people that have the tail releases so that they can simplify some of the work that we've introduced by creating this little complexity? Well, the first thing that we offer is obvious. At least 8 years of support for each long-term support release. Right? So if you go back to the presentation, you see that 17, 8, 17, 21, and 25 coming in September, all will have at least 8 years of support. Now, every time I show this, somebody cleverly points out, there's some anomaly there, isn't it? How come JDK 8 will outlive JDK 17? Or JDK 11, how come it will outlive, where are the 8 years? Right? It's in the current roadmap, 8 will live for a total of 16 years and 7 months, 11 for 13 years and 4 months. Right? And people ask me, when are you going to, why is that weird? Well, that's because as we approach the scheduled end of life of a release, we take a look at our list of customers, how easy it is to migrate from the release that's about to die to the next release, how many people are asking for an extension, how many Oracle products are asking for an extension, because we have Oracle products that we said, please update, and then they're like, oh, we need an extra year or two to update. So we end up extending them. Does that mean, Aurelio, that we're going to get an extension for 17? Well, abso maybe. I don't know. Ask me around 2026. I'll tell you whether 17 will be extended, and if so, for how long. Same answer, by the way, do we expect to see JDK 8 extended any further? Maybe. Careful though, when we extend things, please read the fine print. Let me give you an example that's going to bite some people. When we extended the support lifetime of 8, we said we can extend it, but we're not going to extend the support lifetime of JavaFX in 8. The April release will not have JavaFX in it. And of course, I expect some customers will not have read the fine print and reach out to me on that one. But as I said, we will extend as needed. Do not assume that we will extend 17, and don't hold it against me if we do. Okay, so how likely is it that we will extend it? It's directly proportional to how many people come that have a support contract and say, I cannot move away from 17. Hoping that that will not be too bad, because of course, the migration from 8 to 11 was a big jump. We changed a lot of things. It's dramatically simpler to go from 11 to 17, or even from 11 to 25. So fingers crossed, we won't have to extend this terribly. Now, okay, nice list of updates. What goes into those updates? Remember that I said I want to keep it stable, but I have to keep you current? So, first thing, the certified configurations. Remember that I said that I need to keep up. This is the current JDK 8 and Jerry 8 certified configuration list. If you scroll down, for every operating system, we say on which JDK version did we start supporting it. And if you scroll down at the bottom, you will find the operating systems that are no longer supported by the vendor, so that we can no longer support them. And if you go to the bottom, you will discover that all of the currently supported versions, all of the operating systems, were added after GA. The complete list of operating system versions that were supported at launch time is no longer supported by the vendor. So we're keeping up. You didn't have to stay in an old version because, hey, that version requires Windows XP or Oracle Linux 6, right? You can keep up. Also, security alerts. Remember that I said every quarter? So on the third Tuesday of January, October, July, and April, well, January, April, July, and October, we release critical security vulnerability fixes. And we do the fixes in a synchronized manner so that if there's a vulnerability in one release, it is likely that it is it's also vulnerable in prior versions. That's why we have to put them all at the same time. That's why they're scheduled. And also, we want to put them all at the same time with other Oracle products. This is not a Java release. This is an Oracle release because we don't want you to have to apply the security updates to Oracle Linux one day, to the database another day, to the Java Runtime another. We try to put them all at the same time so that you can just schedule it. There's one that says on security alerts if needed, because what happens if there's a vulnerability that cannot wait until the next scheduled CPU? then we would release a security alert. We haven't done so in many, many years. And if we're lucky, we won't have to. But if we have to, it'll be announced. There is an email alias that you can register to get a notification if there's a security alert. We also have changes in cryptography. This is the one thing that we announced ahead of time. So there's another, I forgot to put the URL here, java.com/crypto-roadmap. Nice convenient redirect, it'll get you to this page. And it lists the upcoming changes in cryptography. They're usually things that most people are not impacted by because we only disable things that are hopelessly out of date. We don't try to push you towards things that you're not ready to go. And if you look at the changes that have already happened, you see where it says additional information? If you click on it, each one of them will tell you how to revert that one change. So that if you completely missed the fact that this was happening and discover it only by applying the update and having some connection fail, you don't have to revert back and lose all of the security vulnerability. You can just revert that one change. Please, if you do, fix that thing. Don't just keep reverting the change, right? Don't keep enabling things that we've disabled. Not a good idea. And there's, remember they said the smaller lists, the critical bug fixes. This is for 11.0.26, the last version. We had 153 of those. And most people do not notice, but that's what you get. Now, that's a lot of work. We do have some tools for you. We have a Java management service. It's an OCI native service that will help you keep track of this so that you don't have to do like I do and try to keep track of which version is where. It runs in Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. Now, you can use it to monitor machines on-premise, on Oracle Cloud, and on any other lesser cloud out there. You install an agent on the machine that you want to manage, and the agent will configure usage tracker and scan your systems, and it will keep track. Now, this tool, the basic functionality, does not require that you are a Java SE subscriber or that you're running an OCI. It's available to everybody, right? You need to create a free OCI account. You don't have to have a paid one. There's no charge for the service per se. If you collect enough data, you may have to pay for the storage cost at a laughable amount. And you have to have several thousand machines before you get to the point where you cross past that free tier to that you have to pay for it or delete some of the older data. So what does the basic discovery allow you to do? It'll find your managed all of the runtimes in those managed instances. How does it do that? Well, it scans the common locations. You can configure it to make it broader or shorter because we don't want to scan your whole drive all the time. And it turns on usage tracker. Usage tracker is a capability that every time you start a Java application, it creates a record saying, it's a local record on that machine, saying, I started this application with this runtime. So this will allow me to send all of this data and create a little chart that says, these runtimes are using this application, are being used by this application. Here's some runtimes that I don't know what you have installed because they're not being used for anything. And I can, since I know which runtimes are out of date, I'll tell you which ones you need to update or upgrade. Update means they're still somewhere in the line. If you're using JDK 13 today, I'll tell you now you have to upgrade. There's no more line on that one, right? And in case you want to programmatically keep up to date, we also have the ability to create scriptable downloads. So instead of having to go once a quarter and figure out, is it 8U225? You can just say, here's a Docker file that will just grab the current version of 8. Right? So you can just say, give me the current version of 11 or 17 or whatever, and it'll keep it up to date. And if you don't want to download it from us, you just want to see the information, there's some APIs, so you can say what are the versions supported, which platforms, which packages are available. All of that is in JMS. There's also some extra goodies if you are a customer. So we can find out if you're using a third-party library. We can compare it against NIST and tell you, hey, that version of the library, there's an update for you. We can use JVM tuning recommendations. We can give you an estimate of how many, well, actually not an estimate, an actual number of, if you're going from JDK 8 to JDK 17, these are the list of APIs that are gone in that one. And If there is a clear alternative, we'll tell you which ones to use. Remember that I mentioned the cryptographic changes? It's kind of a catch-22 because I said the runtime decides them for you. So you have no idea whether you're using TLS 1.2 or, well, there is a file recorder event that gets created if you turn it on, and then we can analyze it and say, oh, is it running afoul of any of the upcoming changes? All right? If you're running in, say, WebLogic, the basic discovery will say you're running WebLogic. That's it. The advanced one will tell you, and here's the services in WebLogic. Right? And I can turn on file recorder. I can do it on every machine individually, but I can also tell the system, go to that remote machine, turn it on that application, gather a couple of minutes, and send it back. So I can use it to update the Java runtimes as well. We also have something called Enterprise Performance Pack, which is we grabbed a JDK 8. We put the JVM from JDK 17, but kept the libraries and everything else from 8. So it is a JDK 8 compliant build of Java, but it has the performance benefits of JDK 17. Hey, Aurelio, you lied. You said you were not going to disrupt 8. Well, the cheat is that we didn't say this or this instead of JDK 8. We give you the choice. So if you want to stay on the original 8, we will continue producing updates for that one. If you want to take the performance of 17, that's available too. And finally, we have the most dedicated Java organization. And when I say dedicated, I don't mean that this is their only job. I mean, these are people that have been with the Java ecosystem for decades. Right? I said I joined via Sun. When I sit with the support team and we sit by seniority, I'm still on the lower half of the table. So we have people here that have been working with the platform since pretty much the launch of Java. They're not a separate organization, they're part of the Java platform team. So if something, unlikely as it is, if it goes past their level of expertise, they actually have direct access to all of the people that wrote the code that are still around, right? And they're, unlike other support organizations, they're not tasked with clearing the JDK of fault. We jokingly say that in some cases, they're trying to just prove that the bug is not the JDK, it's your code, so I'm out. Right? That's not the role. The role is to help you get your Java application running, so they will apply their expertise, even if the problem is, say, a third-party library or a common framework. They may not be able to help solve the framework, but they'll tell you, oh, yes, a common problem, here's a known workaround. And we also have another team called the Java Value Engineering team, which are not just for support, but imagine that you decide that you want to install Java Management Service. Of course, if you have a complex organization with proxy servers, it's a little bit of a pain to do it. And there's no benefit in getting good at it because you're only going to do it once. So we have a team that gets benefit from learning how to do it, so they know the pain points. You can call them and ask for help. Okay? So I've got 1 minute and 30 seconds. Hopefully, you've gotten some of what is available for the people that are using Java to maintain existing applications. Thank you.